So this is going to be our first live on YouTube. And I am here because my TikTok live got shut down and somebody is here. Welcome. And they are gone just like that because they don't know who I am. And this is also new. And I talk about over on TikTok, I talk about Ukraine. I talk about why Ukraine is so important, why Americans should be interested in Ukraine, why we should support the continued defense of Ukraine. And there are lots of reasons for that. One is that it is in our national interest. This continued support for the defense of Ukraine in the face of Russia's war of aggression should be one of the top political priorities for the United States. I I do not understand people who think it shouldn't be. Not to say that we don't have lots of problems at home. Not to say that Donald Trump does not continue to be a threat to American democracy. He does. But he would not be possible if it were not for Kremlin support. I am absolutely certain of that. And here in Ukraine, I've been very fortunate to meet numerous independent journalists who absolutely agree with that sentiment. And we have to stop being blinded by how Kremlin propaganda has influenced our electoral processes in the United States. And the threat, the very real threat that Russia and the Kremlin pose to the United States. Uh, yeah, I don't think there's anything more important happening in the world right now than the war in Ukraine. And therefore, I think that the continued American support of that war is the most critical issue in foreign policy facing America today. So I'm going to go ahead and run through what I've been doing live over on TikTok. And that's basically a news wrap up for the day. This is Friday, August the 18th, day 541 of Russia's war of aggression. And today, the news is that around Robotny, 2 Ka 52s were shot down. Those are the alligator attack helicopters. Now, these helicopters are why the Ukrainians need air support. These helicopters can fire at tanks, they can fire anti tank missiles and at ground forces from a distance of 15 kilometers. The Ukrainians don't have anything to take them out that goes more than like a man pad, maybe 5 kilometers. So the helicopters can fire at frontline targets with impunity, turn around, go back, reload, come back. And the F-16s, and this was just announced today, the U.S. has signed off on Denmark and the Netherlands sending F-16s to Ukraine. Feels a little bit like too little too late to me, given that they've been asking for these F-16s for a year. And the word is that the pilot training is going to take, and the delivery of the systems is going to take another year, which is insanity to me. Now, this is one time in my life where I really hope, I'm deeply hopeful, that our government is lying to us just to fool the Russians. I am hopeful that, in fact, pilots have been trained, people have been trained, the training's been ongoing in secret. Secret airfields have been built out here because the F-16s are going to need longer runways. But it seems very unlikely that that is going to be the case. It looks like we have to hope for a near-term victory, but we have to plan for a long war. So the good news is, as of today, the Ukrainian armed forces have eliminated one third of the entire helicopter fleet of the Russian Federation. 316 choppers down. Unbelievable. Without basically an air force of their own. It's a very small air force. It doesn't even compare what they've got left right now. So those F-16s that have been promised and that the U.S. has finally signed off on will make a big difference in this war, but God knows it's going to take time. Training the pilots, training the flight crews, training the mechanics, and building the runways to support them. All of that is ahead of it for the Ukrainians. Um, there's a Ukrainian trader, Alexander Kordovsky, who switched sides early in the war and went over to work for the Russians. He's a Kremlin installed Russian commander down in the Kherson region. And today he made a lot of noise about the war, complaining about the lack of reinforcements. Apparently, he was one of the commanders that had some responsibility for Orozhiny and the losses there. He and his reinforcements were lost, or his troops were lost in Orozhiny, and Orozhiny, of course, has been liberated by the Ukrainians at this point. And he made quite a stink today about the fact that he didn't get reinforcements, he didn't have access to ammunition. Hey, Lars, how you doing? Good to see you, pal. Since this thing is being recorded, Lars, and I'm the only one here, well, now you're here. Nice to see you. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through it uh, for the purposes of the recording. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to chat them in. Thanks, pal. So this Russian commander, I say Russian commander, this Ukrainian traitor who switched sides and went over to the Russians back in 2014, Alexander Kordovsky, former FSB guy, right? He joined up with the FSB sometime after 2014. He said today, he said the words, Ukraine will not be defeated, and that Russia should sue for peace. Now the Russians have this insidious plan. They want to freeze the conflict. My friends, have we learned nothing from the past? This is the worst possible solution that you could have right now. First of all, the only people that can set the terms for Russian surrender are the Ukrainians. That's the first thing. So nobody should be asking Ukraine to trade land for peace. Does nobody remember the Sudetenland? Does nobody remember what led to World War II? The the appeasement of the infernal Nazi machine? That's what we're looking at if we hand Crimea to the Russians and the Donbass to the Russians at this point. Where all you're going to do is put off the inevitable and give Putin a chance to rearm. Leave the terms of peace up to the Ukrainians. Trust our allies. Give them what they need to win. It is time to defeat this Russian beast. Kill this beast while it's wounded. And stop talking this nonsense about trading land for peace. There's no peace when you give in to terrorists. None. Had another drone strike today near the Kremlin. They're bombing Moscow City, which is kind of like the financial district in New York. It's the business hub, the top end where all the money sits, where the Department of Information sits, the folks responsible for the Russian trolls, right? That's that building that got hit twice by drones last week. In Russia is on fire. And in this episode of Russia is on fire, it's the port of Novosibirsk, and there's an ice rink in Yekaterinburg, Russia, which is a funny name. That's a German name, but it's an ice rink. It's funny to me that there's an ice rink on fire. It seems almost impossible, doesn't it? But Russia is on fire. The port of Novosibirsk, of course, is uh, where they took that landing ship that was hit by drones last week. It's a major Russian port, major military base. Apparently, some drums of oil caught fire. Ivan was smoking again. We don't have any evidence to indicate that this was partisan activity or that it was internal insurgent activity or that it was a drone strike. At this time, there's no word on any of that, but it's a big fire. The Kharkiv offensive continues, right? This is the offensive up in the north. And I want to highlight to everybody that the Russians are not making progress there. It's they're using the same mechanism that they used in Bakhmut, overwhelming waves of infantry with little or no mechanized support, which means a lot of dead and wounded is what it means. Right, this is where the term meat grinder comes from. And they're throwing them there, trying desperately to pull Ukrainian forces away from Kherson, away from Zaporizhia, where they're making real progress, uh, cutting the land bridge to Crimea so that the siege of Crimea can begin and some real territory can be retaken. We'll talk about that in a second. But what's politically important about this push in the north, this Russian offensive in Kharkiv, is that it runs counter to this freeze the conflict narrative, right? Oh, these four provinces that we've annexed have always been Russia and should continue to remain Russia. That's the story we're supposed to believe. But the offensive in Kharkiv makes it clear that that's a lie, that it's nonsense, that they want the whole of Ukraine, and that Eugene told us the truth when he said that this war was about one thing and one thing only: dividing the resources of Ukraine among the oligarchs of Russia and eliminating the existence of the Ukrainian language, culture, and people. Genocide. That's the purpose of this war. Make no mistake about it. Uh, Kremlin officials admitted that sabotage groups have crossed the Dnipro and are operating in Kherson. And the word is that it's more than just sabotage groups that have made a landing. The word is that you've got three good bridgeheads there now. Hey, Vanetta, how you doing tonight? And you've got three good bridgeheads there now at Halopristine, at Olshetsky, and up the river at Kazachi Lahari. The 82nd Air Assault Brigade is in action at Robotyne. NATO armored IFVs supported by NATO tanks, perfectly suited to exploit the hole in the defensive lines that has been created, I believe, by the 47th Mechanized Brigade or 46th Mechanized Brigade. Went in there first, opened up that hole. Now, if they can get through to the other side where there aren't any minefields, where the tanks can maneuver, we could see some real maneuver warfare. We could see some real advance. The advance right now is reported to be between 16 and 20 kilometers deep, depending on who you talk to. And the Ukrainians have created fire control over the road to Tokmak. This is everything. This is everything. If the Ukrainians have fire control over Tokmak, over the road to Tokmak, that's the resupply line. Nothing's going to the front. You can't fight a war without food and ammunition and medicine. It can't be done. So if this is accurate, and I have every reason to believe that it is, we're going to see some major changes to the front lines in the South over the next few weeks. And with the 82nd Air Assault Brigade in there in modern tanks and no minefields to get in the way, everything changes. Now, on the subject of there being no minefields, on a Russian Telegram channel today, I saw a video of a Polish tank running what do you call it? Like interference, basically, as the Russians tried to use artillery against it. And this tank had a freedom of movement that indicated no minefields. No minefields. If this is accurate, and I have reason to believe that it is, then the breakthrough has now come. There's a spot, there's at least one hole in the defensive lines on the that gets us to the other side of the minefields. And if the Ukrainians choose to pour troops through there, that could change the whole nature of the war in a very short time. Because behind the lines, the defenses are thin. This really pissed me off today. The Washington Post has leaked documents. KLW World News. Sure, pal. Shoot me an email at peteralexievich at gmail.com. Happy to talk to you. And the Washington Post has leaked documents from U.S. intelligence saying that the offensive is doomed and they're never going to get to Kharkiv, or never going to get to Melitopol and Mariupol this summer, anyway. And this pisses me off to no end because we haven't given the Ukrainians the weapons that they need to win, and now we're bitching that they're not winning when it is in our interest for them to win. What else we got here today? 400 children have been stolen again from Ukraine and shipped to re-education camps in Russia. This is happening again. Kyiv thanks Berlin for 2 IRSTs. These are air defense missile systems. Good move, good stuff to have. The UN has released figures that 9,444 civilians have been murdered by the Russians since the beginning of this conflict, and another 16,940 have been wounded by the Russians since the beginning of this full-scale invasion, for a total of 26,384 dead or wounded at the hands of the Russian invaders. Now, those are verifiable. That's what we know about for sure. We don't have any idea how bad it is back in the occupied territories. No idea. Not yet. U.S. intelligence has estimated that 500,000 combatants have been killed or wounded in action since this conflict began. The Joseph Schulte, which was the first grain ship to run the Russian blockade, has reached Istanbul safely today. And so that's a good win. That's a good win. Turkey warns Russia to not escalate in the Black Sea again. Turkey's basically said to Russia, don't pull any more shit, guys, because it's going to be a problem if you do. And then finally, there is a great interview with Alexander Etkind, who's a Russian historian, European historian, that I cannot recommend highly enough, from Times Radio today. And Alexander talks about the fact that we will see the collapse of the Russian Federation in our lifetimes, and I couldn't agree with him more, frankly. So, guys, that's it. Lars and Vanetta, you guys still with me? And that was good thinking. So thanks. You guys got any questions? Any thoughts about the war in Ukraine today? I know both of you are big supporters of the defense of Ukraine. And for our third guest, if you have any questions concerning the situation in Ukraine, I'm Peter Alexievich, and I'm on the ground here in Kyiv, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And if not, then we are done for the night. And I'll probably do a consolidated version of this and just post it as a recording, as recordings to the TikTok as well. Why do I think the Defense Department leaked the info? That's always the question, isn't it, Vanetta? Yeah. So the question is, why would they leak the information? Because these things don't happen in a vacuum. One can assume that it was done with some knowledge and intention. One would hope, right? Because if it wasn't, then the only thing that I can think of is that some pro Russian mole inside the Defense Department wanted the information out there to support the Russian narrative and to support Russia. Now, if it wasn't some pro Russian leaker inside the Defense Department, then one would think that it's actually an information operation, pointed at the Russians. Could it be that in secret, Joe Biden and Volodymyr Zelensky are the best buddies that are on the same page about everything? But in public, they've agreed to have these disputes so that Putin thinks he's winning, dividing the West. Now, that's pure speculation on my part, right? The evidence doesn't seem to support it. I mean, the last thing that we want is the Russians sending more people, and the last thing that Russia wants is another mobilization. By all accounts, right, in the last 2 weeks, it's been 36, I think, at the last count of Molotov cocktails thrown into Russian recruitment stations. So Russia doesn't want another mobilization. That doesn't make sense. Not at all, KLW World News. I appreciate it. This is my first YouTube live stream, and I'm going to be. I've been doing the Live at 5 news over on TikTok for about a week now. And now I got suspended for no good reason. No reason at all, other than the fact that the anti-Ukraine, pro-Russian propagandists, I think, are actively trying to stifle pro-Ukrainian voices in social media. So I'm going to be doing the Live at 5 over here on YouTube from now on. I don't know, Lars. I wouldn't count on the Russian people for an uprising anytime soon. You got to remember, Russia, the people in charge in Russia are the same people that brought you 400 years of serfdom and then 80 years of communism. Right? What is that? That's like 25 generations of humanity who have been told you get no say in your politics. You have no voice. You can make no change. You can do nothing. Sit at home. The world moves on without you. 25 generations of humanity being told this. And then you've got all these people in the Russian Federation who aren't Russian at all, who are conquered people and who have been treated as conquered people for 25 generations. You look at the interviews, there's a guy who does street interviews in Russia. I don't know how he's not in jail, but there's a guy who does street interviews in Russia with people, and they all say the same thing. There's nothing I can do. Nothing I can do. We don't have any say. So I don't know that we can count on any kind of an uprising coming from Russia. What you can count on, though, is that with the evisceration of the Russian army, once the federal government stops the money that goes to all of these little oblasts and independent federal states and such, where there are strong ethnic minorities with their own identities, like Chechnya, for example, right? I think that you could very much, those far eastern provinces that are all Asian, really, former Chinese protectorates, Siberia, Irkutsk, Yakutsk, Kamchatka, we could see those guys break away as independent nations. Russia could be sliced in half. The evidence isn't supported. Is this propaganda from the Defense Department? I don't get it. Vanetta, I don't get it either. Now look, now look, it could just be a leak, right? Somebody somewhere owed somebody a favor and gave them this information. And let's be clear on something. The US intelligence has gotten Russia wrong over and over and over again. And so there's no reason to believe that they got this one right. My faith, and look, it's not that I don't have faith in our intelligence services. They did say that Russia were the ones that interfered in the 2016 election. That I believed, and there's good evidence to indicate it. But I think that they underestimate the will of the Ukrainian people and Ukrainian ingenuity. The Ukrainians right now are doing something that we would never do. We would never take on this offensive without air support. And so there's a built in bias in the analysis that somebody else can do something that you would never do yourself. You know what I mean? It could just be that simple, a confirmation bias that is influencing the analysis. Could it be a Republican, right? And not just any Republican. We want to be, I do want to start being careful about that. A MAGA Republican, right? A Trumpist. It could be that. It could be an information psyop against the Russians. Give the Russians more confidence. I don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody knows if the analysis is even a legitimate analysis, but it's what we're getting. And then, Lars, you make a good point right now. There's the question, first off, there's the question of what happens to the Russian Federation after Russia loses this war. And in my mind, the internal pressures are building and the Russian Federation is going to collapse, just like Alexander Etkind writes in his book, Russia Against Modernity. Um, but then there's another question. The former Soviet states, the 14 former Soviet states, aside from Russia, right? You got the Baltics that have broken from Russia completely. That's three. Now you have Ukraine that's breaking from Russia completely. That's four. That leaves 10 former Soviet republics that could emerge as new national identities without the ties and vassal status to Russia. Georgia is the first on the list. It wants 20% of its land back and it's going to get it. They're one of the first dominoes that should fall as this war wraps up. Why? The only reason they're not massing troops on the border to take advantage of the current conflict and kick the Russians out of there is because of that, what's his name? The billionaire there who thinks he owns the whole country and acts like it too. Then you got Belarus. The Belarusians fighting on the side of Ukraine right now are going to be battle hardened and ready to go into Belarus and take Lukashenko out and bring the government in exile home. And you'll have a revolutionary democracy in Belarus. Now you're up to six. From there, you got to figure out how to get peace between the Armenians and the Tajiks, or the Azerbaijanis, sorry. The Azerbaijanis and the Armenians. Convince them that their fighting only serves the interests of the Kremlin. It doesn't serve their interests. They have much more in common than they have with St. Petersburg and Moscow. Well, thank you, KLW World News. I'll be very interested to discover who you are. Yes, they are. And Lars Vanetta is an American. She's intimately familiar with MAGA. Good. Other questions? Questions, comments, points of observation, or personal need? Welcome, everybody that just came in. This is my very first YouTube live stream. My name is Peter Alexievich. I'm an American in Kyiv, and we're talking about all things Ukraine. Today's top stories, of course, F-16s have been pledged to the country, and it's a sin that they weren't pledged a year ago. And we're just talking about the fact that the Washington Post today published some documents, or the summation of some documents, that suggest that the Ukrainian counteroffensive will not reach Mariupol or Melitopol this summer. And I disagree. I absolutely disagree, especially now that the 82nd Air Assault Brigade is pouring through the breach at Robotny and is operating in what appears to be a minefield clear zone past the Russian defenses. They take those highlands. They've already established fire control over the Tokmak Road. They move south of there, continue along those ridges, keeping up those highlands. They'll establish fire control over the road to Berdyansk. And once you've got fire control over those two roads, nobody gets any more ammunition. That'll be a problem. TikTok lives are now on YouTube. They sure are. Hey, Ricky, how you doing, pal? Thanks for dropping by. Russia is on fire, Lars. Ivan is smoking, and it's a bad habit, Ivan. We have the port of Novosibirsk today is on fire. Reportedly, some oil drums there caught fire. Um, and then from there, the fire spread to something like 5,000 square feet of the port is ablaze. And then the ice rink at Yekaterinburg. I think it's like Catherine the Great. I think it's a Russian diminutive of Catherine. Uh, so the ice rink there is on fire. Russia's on fire, man. Uh, and we just had somebody, I forget who it was now, but I just saw some good reporting that did an analysis. Because, of course, what people have been saying is that these fires, oh, they're just normal fires, they're normal industrial accidents, it happens, yada, yada. No, no. The number of fires in Russia, of industrial fires and large scale fires, is up something like 600% over last year. There's no, or maybe it was 600 over the average. Yeah, I apologize. It escaped me just now. The point is that there's a significant differential. Now, some of these fires, it turns out, can be attributed to Ukrainian drone strikes that the Russians have never admitted to. That's part of it. Um, so increasingly, the Ukrainians are active with drone strikes on Russian soil, as we saw with the recent optics factory outside of Moscow, and as we saw with the hit on Moscow City today. That was the optics factory. Yeah, Lars. And it appears that that factory may have been converted for the production of additional war materiel because a number of shells, 155 millimeter shells, if I'm not mistaken, blew out of the plant all over, rained down all over that part of town. And there were pictures on Telegram, all kinds of people taking pictures of these shells just in the streets. Um, and the mushroom, I mean, it was, let's hope it wasn't pretentious, huh? But it was a mushroom cloud when that place went up. Had to be 2,000 feet in the air. Huge explosion. Knocked all the screens off all the windows. And the principal function of that plant apparently is the production of optics for night scopes, night vision goggles, uh, gun sights, that sort of thing. So Russia's on fire, baby. Russia's on fire, and not in a good way. Okay, guys. Anything else? Not likely, Lars. Not. I'm not aware of any drones that the Ukrainians have that could reach Siberia. The 1,000 kilometer Beaver drone, to the best of my knowledge, is their longest range drone. So that puts Moscow well within their sights, but Siberia too far. One of the things that's happening up in Siberia, that of course is where all of the Russian oil and gas is produced, right? But here's the thing about that equipment that I think it's worth mentioning. My understanding is you got to keep oil in those pipelines. You got to keep gas running through those pipes. You got to keep everything pressurized and you got to keep it moving. If you don't, if you let it sit, if you shut it down, if you depressurize it, it starts rotting away almost instantly. Thanks, Vanetta. Have a good night. I'm going to wrap up right now. It starts rotting away almost instantly. And then it becomes weak. And then it degrades. And then it's no good for anybody. And so um, they're not doing that. They've had to, because they're selling so much less uh, volume through the pipelines these days, because the pipelines all ran to Europe and they're not running anymore. So that means that they're having to put this stuff on ships. Well, if you start turning off the taps, you can have real problems, and those problems can quickly become explosive. That's my understanding of the kind of engineering of the thing. Well, Ricky, I did cover the news about the helicopters. Two Ka-52 alligators were shot down around Robotny, which brings the total number of helicopters lost in this war of aggression to 316. And that means that the Russian helicopter fleet, the entire Russian helicopter fleet for the entire Russian Federation, has now lost one third ships, which is unreal. Just unreal. Nobody could have predicted a year ago that that would happen. So, Ricky Pal, I'm sorry, but did come in about a half an hour into the live. So why don't Why don't I shut it down now, pal? I'll end the stream and you can rewatch the stream. Or give me a few minutes. I'm going to re record it for TikTok. But I do appreciate you, brother. I appreciate you coming in. Thanks. Good night, Vanetta. You have a good day. All right, kids. We're going to do this live at 5 here, promptly at 5, Eastern Daylight Time, US time, every day for the next week at least. And I sure do appreciate everybody coming in for the first time. For the very first one, pop my cherry. For the very first one here tonight. Thanks, guys. Take care. Have a great day, Lars. Thanks again, Ricky and Vanetta. Good to see you guys.